Hi. Okay. Welcome to Me Made May Day. Oh man, I do this every time and I felt so prepared today for everything. It's day 26. Hi, it's Tuesday, the 26th of May. Great start. Hi, so I'm Simone. I have a business called Goblin Fruit, but here on the channel at the moment, I'm just doing a Me Made May challenge. So sharing my Me Made May outfits. No, my Me Made outfits for May. Gosh. I mean, it's been 25 days. You'd think I'd be getting it right. So today I'm also going to have a quick talk about, I hope it's going to be quick, but I keep thinking of things I want to say, about sewing with knits. So tips for sewing with knits, because I mostly sew with knits, and this entire outfit is knitwear. So today's outfit, you've seen all the pieces before. So my self-drafted tube skirt in this sort of crepe finish, Ponte knit. I keep going on about how I really like natural fibres over synthetics, but I realise I've mostly sewn synthetics. I really went on a big binge on fabrics from Pit Trading, and because they sell these really cheap remnant fabrics. Which are mostly synthetic. So most of my winter wardrobe is synthetic. Anywho, the jacket is, I've shown you before as well. This guy, Butterick B6244. It is like a winter weight wool, woven or felted, I guess, outerwear jacket, which I've just made in a rib knit instead, and I made size 8, so the smaller size in the packet. Obviously when you're working with knits, you may want to size down because knitwear stretches out like wovens don't stretch out over the body. The top is a hack of this dress. Again, you've seen it before, you've seen me do several hacks of this. It is Quick Sew 1640, this wonderful 80s number. So yeah, I just do the top instead of the skirt, and I've lengthened it, shortened it, put bands on it, all sorts of things. Okay, so I'm doing this. Sorry, I keep having to walk around the dog who is right there. And again, any heavy breathing you hear is the dog and not me. So I did a little call out yesterday for ideas for videos that people wanted to see for the last week of Me Made May, and the wonderful dressing Tess suggested some tips for sewing with knits, because I predominantly sew with knits, and I thought that was brilliant. So I'm just going to do that. It's really, really cold, and I'm possibly going to lose my voice and cradle my teacup a lot. Never mind, we'll keep working with it. Alright, so I started, when I started sewing, so mostly I guess when I was like 19, 18 maybe, and my family, like my dad's side of the family particularly, are into sewing, and they mostly sew with like t-shirts and like my aunt had a business selling like knit garments at markets with fringing and beads on them. It was huge at the time, okay? It was the 80s. They were very, very popular. And, you know, my grandmother made a lot of like knit skirts and stuff like that. So I guess probably wasn't really afraid of sewing with knits or worried about it. I was certainly not allowed anywhere near the overlocker, which was clearly a fear that came with me for years and years, because I did not buy an overlocker for a very, very long time. Probably one of the first knit things I decided to make for myself, the first knit thing I decided to make for myself was when I was like, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11. And I decided to make my dance costume for myself. One day maybe I'll show you photos. I think I hand sewed it. I can remember I think my family went grocery shopping and I stayed at home and sat and made my dance costume. My mum was like, "You sure?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm doing it." So I did. Okay. But after that, I decided to make, I mentioned previously, I was a goth in the 90s in Perth where there was no internet, no specialty type shops for, you know, goth clothing. So I also made my mum make me stuff. I did make some stuff myself. And the first thing I decided was what I really wanted was a mesh, long sleeve, tight bodysuit to go, you know, under things. And from memory, that's one of the first things that I made, and I did wear it quite religiously. And that is probably the fabric that I would 100% recommend you do not start with. But we'll get to that. So, you know, all of these things that I might say, I went for the hardest possible things first. I went for stretch fabrics first, which everybody is afraid of. I went for this really, really light mesh. I did it on my domestic sewing machine. Yeah, it fell apart eventually. It was the 90s, holes were in. It was grunge. Kept wearing it. It's fine. Don't panic. It's going to be fine. But in case you still want some tips, here we go. Alright, so sewing machines. Like, yes, for working with knits, an overlocker is ideal. But I totally understand if you just can't afford an overlocker, you don't want to buy all of that extra machinery, you happen to have a domestic machine, and it is perfectly fine. Or yeah, you can be afraid of overlockers, that's also fine. Totally been there. And don't want to learn something new. I'm quite, definitely reticent on learning a new thing sometimes, depending on what it is. Right, so on your domestic machine for sewing with the stretch fabric, with the stretch, you obviously want to use different stitches and different needles. For stretch fabrics, you can get a stretch needle. You may have a universal needle that might work. Everything that I say and everything that you might want to try, just test it on a scrap piece first. Just test. It's easy. What was I saying? Okay, you might different stitches, different needles. Needles, stretch needles, ballpoint needles for jersey. The main difference on a ballpoint needle is it's like, obviously it's a rounded edge rather than a pointy edge. The very, very sharp pointy edge will pierce through the elastic and will encounter some resistance as it does so. It might not make the loop quite so easily and also might degrade your fabric. Whereas the ballpoint will part through the weave at the most convenient place, and that's what it's made for, to stop making holes and to stop any, like as a pointy needle pushing through the elastic fibers in a knit will push it into the machine, and that's when you get that, it's catching everything. I mean, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why you might get that. You know what I mean, when all the fabric just goes and pushes down into the machine. That's a bad feeling. It's a bad feeling. And, okay, so different stitches on your domestic machine. So I'm a big fan of a zigzag because it's really easy to undo if you get it wrong. Yes, on a garment it can produce quite a loose kind of an effect. So the stitching will kind of pull through a bit and you can see it sometimes. You can always reinforce that with something else. You can use what people generally call the lightning stitch, is quite popular. My only issue with the lightning stitch is it's really painful to unpick. Like, if you get it wrong, it's there forever. And then they'll generally have like some kind of faux overlocking stitch. Just check the panel or whatever on your machine. And I love that stitch. It's probably my preference. It can be really, really slow on a domestic machine because it's like doing a lot of things at once. Whereas, you know, if you're powering through on an overlocker, you're powering through. And then if you want to get fancy, you can do a twin needle for your finishes on a domestic. All of these things, some machines will love it and it'll be really, really easy, and some machines it won't. It's not you, it is the machine. So when I started with a Janome sewing machine that my mum gave me. And I mean, originally I was using her machine, so she clearly wanted me to stop doing that. So I was using a Janome. It was definitely the lower to middle end of the price range. Very, very basic. And for all of those kinds of stretch stitches, zigzags, and the side overlock and all of those things, it was really, really good. I don't think I ever tried it on a twin needle, or maybe I did. But now I have a Bernina, and it's a fancier Bernina. And I did make a little bit of a mistake with it when I bought it. Something that I didn't think about was the fact that this machine is particularly geared towards quilters, which means that it's for easy to sew midweight cottons and not stretch knits. So sometimes it gives me a hard time. It does do a twin needle really, really nicely. But for some reason, I mean, I'm not going to show you what this garment is because it's for a client. It's a client sample, so that's her design and it hasn't been released yet. But so this is just a Lycra leotard. My Bernina will not sew this Lycra. If I use a Schmetz stretch needle, I get the best possible result, but it still skips stitches all the time. When I first got the machine, it did actually sew it, and then just one day it went, nah, I'm not into it anymore. I've taken it to be serviced. The guy at the shop says absolutely nothing wrong with it. You have to, the technique of having a piece of paper underneath and sewing through, or with some wash away interfacing, which go into later. Oh my god, this is going to be a long video. I am waffling hardcore. Alright, Sim, speed it up. Anyway, my machine would not sew this fabric. So most of what I do on this now, I do with the overlocker. Alright, overlockers. You can have just your standard overlocker, and then for finishes and stuff for stretch, it's also, a lot of people really love to have a cover stitch. Now I have a 2-in-1. Which is something that a lot of people will really say, don't do that. What I was going to say with my, far out, see, hurry up, and then I skipped something. With my little Janome, it did have a stitch that my Bernina doesn't have, and it's a stitch that I used a lot in my lingerie making, which is a 3-step zigzag. And for trims and finishes, and if you want this really girly kind of lingerie effect, so that's the 3-step zigzag. I flippin' love this stitch. So I bring out my old Janome if I'm going to finish anything like this and do that. Kind of hard to tell on this really hardcore gold fabric, but it's what I had to hand that I'd done it with. Yeah. On this dress, I'd also made prior to getting my cover stitch, and this is a Lycra velvet, so very, very stretchy. And this has been twin needled on the hem, and I'm going to show you, like, the effect looks really good, but because this fabric is so, so stretchy, this is why I'd say test it. The stitches have bust with use. So that's what a twin needle looks like on stretch velvet, and that's when the stitches are bust there. So what's happened is, as I've been wearing this hem and stepped forward, the thread underneath has broken. Which is why I do samples, I guess. I will show you, yeah, for something else. Yeah, so there are limitations to what you can do on a domestic. How I would say to finish something like that on a domestic machine, well, actually, for a velvet like this, you don't even need to finish it. It doesn't fray. You don't need to hem it. And I know that people go, oh, I really, really like nice finishes, but an unfinished, it'll hang really, really smooth. It'll never fray. what's the problem? But if you really want to have a finish, then you're probably going into doing maybe a zigzagged rolled hem or something like that to get it without popping. Or you could just make a bigger skirt that when you stepped forward, you didn't break all the stitches. That's probably the solution. Okay, so overlockers. Originally, I bought a really craptastic overlocker. I got it secondhand for $50 and I tried my very, very hardest to kill that thing. And I think that's a great way to learn. I know that a lot of people will say get the best machine you can afford for your money. I quite like fixing and tinkering around with machines. I did at one point do part of a mechanical engineering degree. That sort of thing does appeal to me. So my solution isn't for everybody. So when, something would go wrong with this very, very $50 secondhand overlocker, I kind of felt comfortable with going in and playing around and seeing if I could fix it. You might not feel the same, and therefore you might want to buy a more expensive overlocker. But also you might be afraid of overlockers, not really sure if you're going to use it very much, and not really confident. Then, get something really, really cheap and see if you can break it. That's my theory. See how badly you can do it before you get a nice machine and you want it to always be operating beautifully. That worked for me very, very nicely. I then bought my Singer Pro 5. It's an American machine, so anybody in Australia know you can't get them here. I bought it on Amazon when the American dollar was really good, and it was a bit of a bargain. But when I got it here, I also had to buy a transformer for it because it's not dual voltage, which means you can't just get a convertible plug and plug it in. You have to get a transformer to transform the voltage, and that's a tricky business in itself, and I'm really quite nervous about my transformer. Even though it's a really expensive one, it has a fuse in it, so it won't overheat and burn my whole house down. I still have that fear. So there you go. But I bought a convertible one because I don't really have the space for two machines. I did need a cover stitch and an overlocker. I am constantly changing thread colors anyway, because when you're doing professional work, the thread has to match the garment. And the conversion, yes, it's tricky, and it took a little while to kind of get quick at it. But because I'm doing it so often from overlocker to cover stitch, it's not a problem for me. I have heard people say this machine is not really for domestic or beginner sewers. It is a bit more of a professional machine. It is nowhere near as fast as a professional overlocker, so I would presume that it would be fast. It's fast, but it's not like professional overlockers are crazy. Even they give me the willies. Because I find you can't do really delicate work on them because they just have stop and go. It's just so I think it's really handy to have the 2-in-1. If you're a beginner or nervous about it, I wouldn't recommend it, but I would recommend getting a really, really cheap machine and thrashing it. Just for fun. No, it's a learning process, and then you won't be afraid that it will break because it really didn't cost you very much. And even if it does break, you can then try and fix it. And if you make it worse, doesn't matter. It really didn't cost you very much. So, all right, so that's my tips on machines. I think the main trick, the absolute main thing that with working with knits is that you have to make sure that that fabric is feeding through the machine really nicely. That's it. That's like the only thing. You have to make sure that both the top and the bottom pieces of fabric as they go through the machine are feeding at the same time. So your feed dogs are pushing it through at the same time. And that you're not pulling on the fabric and stretching it out. It's just the machine itself is pulling it through. You're not having to do any of the work. So how you achieve that, on my original Janome, it did have different foot pressure, which my Bernina now doesn't have. Different foot pressure is fantastic. So if it's a really heavy fabric, you can make the foot, oh man, it's been a while since I've used it, make the foot quite light, so it's not pushing down so hard to feed through. Anyway, I can't remember which way around it goes. But if you're finding on your little test piece that it's really hard to get the fabric to keep moving through, just change that foot pressure. My main issue with sewing knits on my Bernina, because I had to go back over a cuff. I did the cuffs yesterday, Sunday, on this cardigan that I showed you yesterday. When I put the cuffs in with all the overlocking, I was concerned that I didn't get in close enough. Oh, that looks really woolly. Anyway, that I didn't get in close enough, like as the overlocking stitch went through, it wasn't catching every single little bit of this heavily gathered edge. Yeah, so I went through with a zigzag on the Bernina to kind of get that little bit closer and make sure that absolutely everything was caught and it wasn't going to come undone. And then that's part of the reason why you got this frilling effect, because the Bernina really grabs the fabric and won't feed through very quickly, and it's really annoying. And I can't change the foot pressure, so probably the thing that I did do to make it a little bit easier is lengthened the stitch length and made it wider as well, so it was moving just faster, and faster made it easier. What else I'm trying to feed that through? So yes, you can change the type of stitch that you do. Stitch length, stitch width, the foot pressure. On your overlocker, you might want to change the differential feed. Just my usual thing with these, like changing these settings, is push it one way, see what happens, push it all the way the other way, see what happens, and the thing that you want is somewhere in the middle. And it'll give you an idea. Okay, so, there is one other thing. I know that there is one other thing to try. A walking foot. Yes, if you have a walking foot on your machine or an attachment, that also really, really helps, because a walking foot will make sure that the top, the foot is moving the fabric through at the same time as the dog's underneath. It does slow the process down, but it does achieve a really nice result. So if you're not in a rush and you want it to be really perfect. I mean, to be honest, the reason why I did this on the domestic was because I couldn't be bothered changing over the overlocker to a single chain stitch and doing it, which is what I should have done. But I couldn't be bothered, so I just grabbed the domestic, which was right there. Sometimes it's about speed. You may also find, so that thing where the needle pushes all the fabric into the machine. And it quite often happens at the very beginning, and it generally happens on very, very lightweight fabrics for me, though I know that some other fabrics can be a problem. I won't start on the, this is something really for domestics over overlockers. Don't start right at the very end of your fabric piece, right at the very, very top. Come in about 5 mil and start from there. You could also use a little bit of paper or stabilizer underneath that first bit so that it stops it from pushing through. You can also use what people call a leader, which I find really annoying and I've never really tried, which is another little piece of fabric that you start with, get that started, and then lead on to the next. So you're kind of tricking your machine into thinking it's using this, and then it's, so like a more stable fabric at the very, very beginning. I pretty much always do the just come in about 75 mil. 0.75 centimetre, is that 75 mil? Anyway, a little bit. Come in a little bit and start from there. You can always backtrack over that bit and try it that way. Also, I'll talk about some stabilizers and interfacing and stuff like that in a bit. But Stretch Fabrics 101, very, very quickly. So first off, I said maybe don't start with one of those really light stretch meshes that I started with. Didn't put me off, so maybe do it. But this is what I'm talking about. So this sort of stuff. Now, I don't know about other countries, but Spotlight here calls this power mesh. It's not power mesh. I'll show you what power mesh is. But yeah, it's super, super stretchy, very, very thin, lots and lots of Lycra content. So the higher the Lycra or spandex content, generally the stretchier it is, but that's not always the case because it depends on the weave. Right, the difference between a stretch and a woven. A woven is made over, under, right? So you've got lots and lots of long ways ones, and then you've got your crossways ones, and your crossways ones go under and over your long ways ones, right? Threads is what I'm talking about. Whereas in a knit, I mean, it's just the same as, Frankie, you're really in a bad spot. It's just the same as like knitting a garment. Your threads loop around and then hook to the one before. So each one is entwined rather than it on like a loom basis. That was a great explanation, Simone. You should totally go into this. Explaining how these things work. You can get wovens with stretch in them. So like this is what Spotlight calls a cotton sateen, but I probably wouldn't, with some stretch in it. That's different. That's not a knit. That's a woven with stretch. And so you could see that it didn't have a lot of stretch, just a very, very little bit. Right. Oof. On these power meshes, all right, rule of thumb, how easy is it going to be to sew equals how easy is it to fold. If it's really annoying to fold the fabric, it's going to be really annoying to sew it. So that's the best way I can think of to explain it. But also, like, yeah, it's really, really floppy. So with stretch, this is another type of a stretch mesh that's actually a little bit easier. And you can see it's not as floppy and heavy. And it's a little bit easier to sew with if you can get something more like this. But this is a slightly more vintagey type fabric. They'll all be called the same thing. So shopping online would be next to impossible to tell what it's going to be. But you kind of refer to this as to how stable the fabric is. And then there are things like stable knits, like Ponte, which are probably your most stable. So if you think in terms of from Ponte through to a mesh like this, see how annoying it is? That's probably your gradient. Now, just because I was saying that that's not power mesh, this is a mid-weight. Have I got a lightweight actual power mesh here? No, I don't. This is power mesh. Like, this is like used in lingerie. It's only got a two-way stretch. All right, so stretch types. So if it's two-way stretch, it stretches across, or depending on how the fabric's woven. These power meshes are woven, like the stretch is in the other direction from normal. But yeah, two-way stretch. If it also stretches this way, it's got a tiny, actually I'm really forcing it, it's really not a stretch, it's just mechanical. Mechanical refers to it's just give that exists in the weave, not an actual stretch. And then that would be a four-way if it's stretched that way as well. If it also, sometimes you'll see it referred to as an eight-way, and that means it's got diagonal stretch, which this slightly does, but it's kind of misleading. I would go with that's just a two-way stretch. I mean, what are you going to say? It's a six-way stretch because it doesn't really stretch that way. Yeah, I guess you could. But yeah, so power mesh, which you would use in like lingerie or corsetry or whatever, has a huge amount of like lycra and spandex in it generally, and it has great recovery, which means it resists being stretched. So this takes a lot of energy to stretch it out, and then the second you forget it, it retracts straight back to its original shape. And it wants to be its original shape. It doesn't want to be the stretched out shape, which means in corsetry it's sucking you in. So you'd have it tight and it will want to pull you in. It will resist your movement whilst being a part of the garment and not just being too tight. Yeah, and you talk about stretch percentages, like how much something will stretch. The easiest way to do that, so you find across your weave or horizontal to your weave, depending on what you're doing. So I've got a cutting mat here. I've got 10 centimetres space out on the cutting mat, fold it in half across the weave, measure out 10 centimetres. So I say, okay, that's 10 centimetres, stretch it out as far as it will go nicely, not to where you feel like you're stretching it out beyond. On your 10 centimetres, so that I can stretch to 16 centimetres, which means it has 60% stretch. Yeah, power mesh and stretch 101. So stable knits I was mentioning, like Ponte. So this is a lightweight Ponte. How do I describe what makes it stable? The fact that it doesn't really want to stretch, but the other one didn't really. It doesn't have a lot of stretch. That's probably more it. It doesn't have a lot of stretch. Generally, I mean, sometimes they have great recovery and sometimes they don't. It just depends on the weave and the content. Knit weave, would you call a knit a weave? Don't know. Other things that can make fabrics, as I said, if it's annoying to fold, then it's going to be annoying to sew. This is a viscose or a rayon viscose spandex knit. It's thin, it's slippery slidey, and when you cut this, the edge rolls. That's also really annoying. So these things just require a little bit more patience. They're not hard, they just require more patience. Polyester knits tend to be a bit easier to sew than like spandex rayons. A little bit more stable. This one's a bit thicker. Yeah, I find them a bit easier. This one is a cotton knit. Floppy softness of what just came up on the camera then. Oh, we're still recording. Okay, let's see. It doesn't have the floppy softness of the viscose. It's a little bit stiffer. Again, it's a little bit easier. Just a little, if you were wondering, you see when you stretch out a print and you can see white through it? That's called grin through, where the original base fabric is grinning through. There you go. Okay, what else have I got on my notes here? So I think we've covered most of the different fabrics. Things with lycra in them that are like swimwear and like stretch velvets. I find them quite easy. I mean, particularly if you've got an overlocker. Don't be afraid of doing swimwear. It's not hard. Or that sort of thing. Because I find lycra is quite a stable sort of a fibre. Next, interfacing, stabilising and reinforcing edges. So, particularly used in like t-shirts across shoulders is some kind of form of stabilizing. You can use clear elastic or you can use a cotton tape. Things like that are used, and you can think about it when you might do other things, like even like a wrap top, like the cross across the front. places where you really don't want that seam to stretch out, you'll need to reinforce it. So shoulders, they kind of sag, even though this is heavily reinforced. I think it was just a little bit too big. When they're hanging on a hanger, particularly, they'll fall out and do sloppy, horrible things. Always pretty much do a shoulder. You may want to do a neckline, depending on the neckline. Things that sort of want to, hug the body. Anyway, most necklines I probably would stabilize somehow. Clear elastic is easy, I find, just to thread it through as you're sewing. On this one, I've used, I keep saying grosgrain, but it's Petersham. I've used Petersham trim, which I was talking about doing on that cardigan before. Yeah, I'll show you quickly. So I've top stitched Petersham onto the finishing just to stabilize it. So can you see that? So this is just a thin rayon Petersham ribbon and stitched down, covering up that inside of the neck and across to the shoulder seam, which is a nice finish on, particularly on more stable knits. If your knit is super, super stretchy, I definitely go the clear elastic. Because the ribbon is non-stretch, and then the fabric is stretch, and that can be annoying. That can be annoying to put two pieces together and get them to feed through together nicely, depending. But some days it's not fun. Can I dress myself? No. So actually what I've only recently been really experimenting with is using interfacings or stabilizers. Some people do when, like, things like these fabrics that curl and are really light, like the viscose spandex, using spray starch on them first. That's quite popular. I haven't tried it. So, I mean, that might really help to stabilize the knit. I've mentioned that quite often I don't pre-wash things. I'm quite comfortable with the shrinkage, apparently. And so if you don't pre-wash it, it'll have all the stabilizers still in there, and it makes it easier to sew. It is recommended, though, that you then wash the stabilizers out before you wear it, because they can interfere with the fabric, particularly on things like sweater knits and stuff like that, and they'll pill and ball because all that stabilizer is still in there. Where was I? Okay, so, and I mentioned it the other day that I put like interfacing in the button placket of the cardigan, which is this product. So this is, Birch have a whole heap of these products, and do you think I can figure out what the difference is between them? No idea. Now, let me try not to confuse them. They are double-sided interfacing tape. So it's kind of annoying because you've got to iron both pieces together at the same time. So you put that down on your edge, turn your hem up, and then iron it as that's sandwiched in between the two layers of fabric. Have I just confused these two? This one is a fusible web, suitable for standard fabrics, iron on, from Birch. And then this one is Save a Stitch, nothing else written about it. Iron on, double-sided, fusible. If you know the difference, please tell me. They both seem to do the same job to me. Like, I could use either one of them and they'll do the same thing. So they're super, super lightweight, so they don't interfere with the thickness of the fabric. But they do stabilize it if you're trying to do a hem or a button placket. So you've got like buttonholes being stitched on and cut out. This hem was done with the stabilizer in there, and you can see how square and flat that edge is. and that it doesn't seem to be rolly. When the twin needle went across, it didn't tunnel, so it didn't pull in together and make a lump. I've discovered something about that, doing that with the lump. I'll tell you in a minute. I was like, ooh, new thing. Anyway, yeah, so I think that's quite handy. I've also ordered some which is single-sided, so not double-sided, and because I hate putting zips in knits. I hate it. So, and most of the time I will avoid putting a zip into a knit, but I really want to experiment with doing some of my lingerie work with zips in it. So I've ordered some single-sided interfacing tape. So really it's just strips of interface, fusible interfacing, to reinforce that fabric that I'll be putting the zip into to stop it from buckling. Because you're a non-woven thing next to, like a woven thing next to a knitted thing, and trying to put them both together and then get it all to line up, prone for error, and that's when you get those buckling zips. So I really want to try that. I've also heard people recommend, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a visor fix actually. It's single-sided interfacing strips, but with a chain stitch through it to stabilize necklines, even on wovens, and bias cut pieces on wovens. And I really want to try that, and I found a wholesaler that sells it. Knitwit Fabrics in Perth does sell it, but I haven't found anything else at Knitwit that I want to order. They do a lot of beautiful knits and prints, but they're just not prints that have really appealed to me. And they're not super cheap, so I haven't put in an order with them when all I want is the visor fix with the stitching in it. But I have found I can buy it from a wholesaler, but I have to buy them 6 rolls at a time. So I don't know, if anybody wants to go in halves with me, we could do that sometime. Maybe I'll just do it anyway. Yeah, so I haven't tried that, but that's also an idea. Right, lastly, I could talk about different ways you could finish edges, but we've kind of covered that, right? A little bit. You could do a binding. I haven't shown you a binding. I'll quickly show you. So, this one is a leotard. It's overlocked and then cover stitched down. So that's just a cover stitch. I use a wider setting for this one on the bound and cover stitched straps. These are samples. They get sewn quite quickly, so don't judge my sewing. It's just supposed to be to show you what the design looks like, not the sewing. And then this is a bound edge, so you can do that as well, where this is a strip of fabric stitched into overlocked down to the garment with elastic, and then you fold the there is a binding foot that you can get, but you can't get one for my machine, so I do it in a 2-step process. So yeah, fold it over and then cover stitch over the top, and that's a bound edge. You could just overlock a piece for like a t-shirt or something, and then twin needle it or cover stitch it down and do like a fatter version or anything like that. A bound edge is a really nice finish. For binding, the trick really is, and for a lot of trims like necklines and stuff like that, is generally about 10% smaller. Sometimes I do 15 to 20% smaller than the opening itself. So measure your opening, so your neck opening, and then create a rectangle of fabric that's 10 to 20% less than that size, and stretch it out onto the garment, and that'll pull it in. The stretch, you're working with the stretch to pull it in and not wave out. So it sits nice and flat against the body. Yeah, there's lots missing. This is by no means comprehensive. This book, however, is slightly more comprehensive and do recommend. So this is Sewing with Knits. I got it secondhand online because I don't think it's out anymore. Sewing with Knits, Classic Stylish Garments from Swimsuits to Evening Wear by Connie Long. And the thing that I just discovered that I wanted to show you, because I just opened it up going, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that because, you know, I reread it. It does have a section on faux ribbing. So you could use a twin needle, or I guess probably my cover stitch, to create ribs. Isn't that cool? So you can create a texture on the knit. I really like it. And then like ideas so that you could do ribbing on your sweater. Like, so it looks like it's been made on a knitting machine or knitted with a different stitch coming into it, but actually it's done with the twin needle. I mean, I don't know how secure that would be, how quickly it would break. She does recommend using, you know, those elasticized threads, which, by the way, I hate. I hate them. One day I'll try again, but my initial response to them was, this is really annoying and I'm never ever going again. But yeah, this book is great. I hope that wasn't too long and not too rambly. I am learning to edit videos, but I'm probably not going to give it a go on this one. It isn't actually really that hard when you have a proper program. I was trying to do it on a free program, which was just deeply, deeply annoying. But now I'm learning the Adobe Premiere Pro, and that's actually pretty easy. So I will get there. I will become a grown-up one day. I've probably missed 100 things. Maybe I'll leave notes about them in the bottom. Anyway, so this was a very, very long one today. Me Made May, day 25. Hope you're all keeping safe. And yeah, if you liked it, if you have any questions, comment below. Like, if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. I mean, you know, if you enjoyed my rambling. And I'll talk later. Bye.